Bear on Bears fans, Combine is here, the day we've been waiting for. Well, Ryan Poles lets us know who's the quarterback. Not quite, but we did get to hear from him at least. We heard from Matt Eberflus as well, and they talked quarterback. They talked Jaylon Johnson. They talked about a little bit of the method that they are going to use to go through this. All that and more on today's episode of the Chicago Bears podcast. We got to break it down with Courtney, Cronin, who was there. Always coming through with phenomenal questions. There were some interesting questions thrown out there today, but yours were always on
Thank
point.
you.
They got to the point. Good ask. There's one thing. I'm not a reporter. Maybe I'm 100% sure it's 9 times harder than I think it is. But I'm just like, we get like 15 minutes with these guys, and some of the questions they get thrown, it's like, he's not going to answer that, guys. Come on.
It's tough because like you do have such limited time with the general manager and the coach, and like, Eberflus did his. I'm in the Indiana Convention Center right now, so Eberflus did like a public podium session, is what I'll call it, and then Ryan Poles did his media availability away from like the the cameras were there, but like it was mostly for local media. And I think that, he handled everything. Like he straddled the line brilliantly today. Like he did a really good job. And he gave us information without like ultimately saying what the team's going to do. Now, I don't necessarily believe that the team's like, oh no, like literally every option's on the table. Like I think they're looking for confirmation on a couple things this week that they'll get from these interviews with the prospects, the workouts, even though we have some, some people aren't going to be throwing, a lot of the top quarterbacks are not throwing, including Caleb Williams, but there's a lot to learn for this team this week. And I think that they're in a really good spot right now. It's the same spot they were in last year, which is wild to think about, but it's ultimately different because the asking price for that number 1 overall pick is going to be so much more than what that Carolina pick was worth for the Chicago Bears.
I thought it was interesting too, right? Because when you say that, and I think when you hear Ryan talk about how his phone's buzzing nonstop here, do you get the feel that when we talk about historic draft compensation, you're talking about something that you're getting from one team, or are you talking about multiple trade backs? We saw Peter King in his retirement article talking yesterday. Like, is there a culmination of deals getting done here, or is there one big deal if the first overall pick were to be moved?
No, I think it's a lot of things. Sometimes it's just teams trying to like fish for information, and Poles even said that, where last year he had to change hotels at the Combine because he kind of wanted to go a little incognito, and it was smart because they held their meetings somewhere else. They weren't as easily accessible for a team at that time. I think at $80 million in cap space, like in the number 1 overall pick, but it was like what I think like the text messages are probably saying would probably be fielding, all right, what's the price on Justin Fields? What's the price on the number 1 overall pick? And on top of that, like, what are you guys doing? Some people are just nosy and they just want to know. And that's probably a majority of it. But he's the busiest guy in Indianapolis. Anytime you have the number 1 overall pick and there is that uncertainty, even though it doesn't feel like uncertainty, there's always a chance that they could trade it. I don't believe that to be ultimately what happens, but you got to listen. Poles said it. I remember it from like the very beginning. You got to listen. Like in January when we asked him about it, he's like, yeah, like if anybody wants to call and like make a deal, like my phone's open. I mean, it might be harder to get in touch with him now, but it's definitely, it's a business strategy, the way that he's playing it right now.
I thought how he talked about it as well was interesting because it feels to me that there is an urgency in trying to go about getting this pick done, but not rushing it. And he kept emphasizing it. He's like, listen, we want to get something done. I thought it was funny when he said tomorrow, and then like everyone laughed, and he was like, no, for real. Like, I want to get this decision done as quickly as possible, but he's not rushing this. Speak to kind of the process that they let you guys in on a little bit.
So that whole that exchange, because it's like, nah, for real, like, I know you say tomorrow, but like, come on, like, give me a real time. I say, no, like, I'm serious about that. That's not hyperbolic. Like, that's obviously he wants to know because he wants to do a couple things. Number 1, he wants to do right by Justin Fields. Like that, he's the key part of this. And we heard from Justin last week, like he's tired of being left in limbo. He just wants to know, am I being traded? Am I not? And I think Ryan Poles empathizes with him. Like it's a benefit of having somebody who's a younger general manager, 37, 38 years old. He's not all that far removed from, a 24-year-old and what might be going through his head is like his career is going to either continue in Chicago or somewhere else. And I thought that was a very human moment where he acknowledged the fact that, of course, you're not just going to trade him to get it done before like some arbitrary timeline, even though free agency is when they kind of have to get it done before then, just because of the market and everything else. But it was it's a vote of good faith that like Poles is keeping his current quarterback in the conversation. He's looping him into everything, and that he feels that he's in a good spot with him. I will say that, the timeline here, when Poles talks about like getting this done tomorrow, I think by this time next week, we may know, which is crazy to think about, like how, and it's Tuesday, so maybe it is later in the week. But if they're talking about, we're doing the same process that we did last year, evaluating the quarterback prospects against our own, and same timeline of the trade that happened last year, which was the Friday after the combine ended, I would not be surprised by the end of next week, before free agency really kicks into high gear with the legal tampering period. I think that that's probably when we'll know one way or the other. If he doesn't get traded, then, by that point, I don't know that the asking price would be what they want if it holds out later into the offseason.
Now, and that's interesting, because I thought, hearing Ryan talk today, that he basically was, I don't know if dispelling, but disputing a lot of the rumors that like, I'm here to work this deal out. This is the reason that I'm here. Versus, right, I'm here for the combine, but if people want to talk to me, they can come talk to me. But I didn't come here to focus on getting the bones worked out, as we had heard reported, on what draft compensation or what a Justin Fields trade would be to get that done. Is that kind of the vibe you got from him?
So he said, contrary to some of the reports that are out there, that this would be where they get the Justin Fields trade done. I mean, there's nothing wrong with saying that, because that's probably ultimately what will happen. But that's, if we're nitpicking here, it's probably not his true mindset. Like, it's, among the many things that he has on his plate right now. But he said he had no master plan to present to anybody today. And maybe that speaks to, all right, you guys aren't going to know by the time that you leave the combine, like, are we trading Justin or are we not trading Justin? Like, that's how I read Ryan Poles' comments. And there's so much to learn, because like, here's the thing, these interviews that are going to take place with these prospects starting tomorrow, like the quarterbacks for them, they're going to meet with Caleb Williams on Wednesday. You got to make sure that you have the right guy. And these are going to be not workouts. These are formal interviews. Like the workout part, like he's not throwing here. He'll throw at his pro day. Like they've seen the on-field product. Here's where you get to learn about how a guy is wired. In the start of it, you don't learn it all in one meeting. Here's how you get to learn about the leadership. When you can ask these guys face-to-face really tough questions sometimes, then that's the way that you can ultimately make your decision and know that you made the right decision, and not feel like, man, if we trade Justin and we don't have the answers on those quarterbacks, that like, you got to have those answers before you pull the trigger on anything, which is why I get it. Like, he's not coming here being like, all right, I'm already trading Justin. Because like, what if something pops up and they're like, man, that's not the guy we thought we were going to be taking number 1 overall. Maybe we should stick with Justin. Again, that feels like a kind of the nuclear option, like not something that like would be super realistic, but you need the confirmation, I think, for Poles to be comfortable in the decision that he's going to make.
Well, I thought a very poignant question that was asked to Ryan Poles, right? Is there a concern about Caleb Williams not wanting to be in Chicago? And he came out definitively. It was like, no. And he was like, and if any reason, I would want to know why. And just speaking to like the infrastructure that the Bears are building up here. And I mean, listen, we've seen the offseason moves. It feels like the Bears are trying to build a coaching staff, a system that speaks to not just 1 year of success with a quarterback, but long-term success. So I think the fact that they're meeting with him tomorrow, that may be the most important thing that comes out of this entire combine. Forget who throws and who doesn't.
No, for real. Like, that's the medical is certainly very, very important. And, depending upon, I know we heard the thing with yesterday with Marvin Harrison Jr., like, is he going to test? Is he not? Like, if he doesn't come here, then like, they don't have the medical on him, which I think that that's something that teams will really miss out on. We'll find out, I'm sure, about like, all that Caleb Williams is willing to do, and the other quarterbacks as well. But, if Ryan Poles doesn't come away confident that, okay, if I take this guy, because remember, like, if he drafts Caleb Williams, and they get a trade for Justin Fields, he's having a real hard conversation with guys real soon.
Yeah.
And I think that that's the part that you got to really appreciate about Ryan Poles, the person. He's not a football robot. Like, he's shows empathy in these situations, and knowing that you're taking out a universally beloved quarterback and replacing him with somebody that you've got to be sure in this market, can you handle the pressure? If you have a couple bad games, how are you going to react to that? How are you going to react to all of us on Sports Talk Radio talking about it and poking and prodding into your success and your failures? Like, is he going to be a locker room guy? Like, and I'm not like suggesting by any stretch that they would find like anything to say otherwise, but like, you have to determine those things. That's the most important information he's going to come away with, that the Bears will come away with this week, to know, okay, this is the direction we're going to go, and we're confident that that is the right direction.
Yeah, and especially with the fact that Caleb Williams is, it almost sounded like, I don't know, maybe I'm reading too far into this, but it almost sounded like Ryan Poles is willing to sit down and have the conversations on, here's why you should want to come to Chicago.
For sure.
Here's why you should want to be a Chicago Bear.
I love that he addressed that question. So it's a very poignant question, because remember, we've heard these reports, like all this unfounded gossip. Colin Cowherd's talking about it.
It gets walked back 14 hours later.
Like, and just kind of like, well, I'm hearing, not like the definitive, he doesn't want to come to Chicago, because I'm sorry, you levy an accusation like that, more or less. Like, that's a pretty big thing. The Bears would certainly, whether it was like gossip or whether it felt like it actually had like legit legs, you got to investigate that. You're not going to, forfeit your future if you drafted somebody who's like, no, I'm not playing here. Granted, that would cause so many headaches, and ultimately, I think Caleb Williams would probably get his way, like, just seeing how these things work out. But good Lord, like, can you imagine, like, in that? And so I think he answered that in a really like strong manner, where he didn't leave. He could have just been like, look, like, I don't know what you're talking about, but like, very clearly, he's done his research on that. Otherwise, you don't say a comment like that. I think he was very calculated in the way that he delivered that, but also like very strong in what he said, that he doesn't feel like that's rooted in any sort of truth. But if it was, I'd want to know why. Like, tell me the why. If that did come up tomorrow night in their interviews in the formal setting, he's got to know, like, from Caleb, from the horse's mouth, because that will be question number one on Friday when we talk to those quarterbacks. I promise you. You want to go to Chicago or not? Like, let's hear it from the horse's mouth. So the Bears will hear it 2 days before we do.
And this is, I mean, like, this is the first time we're really going to get to hear Caleb Williams say anything on this. This is very similar to the
much, like, during the year.
Very similar to the Justin Fields podcast.
Yeah. No,
like,
you're right.
That to me, the fact that we're going to get to hear, okay, Caleb, how do you feel about this? What did you and listen, I hope somebody literally goes, so what did you think when Colin said this? Because now you're putting words in a player's mouth who we don't hear speak enough.
Yeah.
That's I mean, like I want to hear it, and I love the fact that we're getting this so often with these new players where they're willing to talk to the people. By the way, yes, that is my daughter in the back for everybody watching on YouTube. It's not a ghost baby. Like when some people just don't acknowledge the thing in the back. It's like, there's a person back there, right? Watch yourself.
She is doing fantastic in her quiet time activity right now, and you can tell her I very much appreciate her working around our schedule. Like, I'm glad that we could fit into quiet time activity, and she deserves whatever she wants for being quiet and like just helping you do your job today.
Oh yeah, she is having a ball, but she literally was back there spelling out bears on the carpet.
Hey, you've got a fast learner.
Yeah, I mean, I've taught her all the penalties because those are the things that get called on us the most. So she's ready for football. One of the people who did talk a lot, though, one of the people who we've heard talk in the offseason, or more so during the season, kind of a little bit at the beginning of the offseason, was Jaylon Johnson. We had a ton of questions on, okay, what kind of contract is he going to get? Are they going to try and come in at a low number? Are they going to try and come in at the tag number?
Mm-hmm.
It sounds like Ryan Poles knows, hey, we missed the window for coming in with the low number here. Yeah. He talked about coming strong with the contract that he's going to present, that he's presenting and talking with Jaylon Johnson and his team on. Does it feel like a deal for Jaylon Johnson is getting done soon from what you heard from Ryan Poles?
This was Ryan Poles putting the ball back in the court of Jaylon Johnson and his agents. Like, you don't typically hear a general manager say verbatim, when I say come strong, that means cash flows are strong, guarantees are strong, the term is strong for him, because that means, like, with his age, 24 years old, he'll get to hit free agency potentially again and test the market. Obviously, if he signs his deal with the Bears and all goes well, he'll probably want to sign another deal in Chicago. Maybe it's an extension that comes, you know, a couple of years into this next deal. Who knows? That's like best case scenario. But I think that was a good thing for Ryan Poles that it played out this way, because it would look real bad, in my opinion, if he had to like walk that back when he's like, you know, I'm confident we'll get something done this offseason. Jaylon's not going anywhere. He said that in January. So if it ended up being like, look, like, you know, it takes two to tango, or we hear like the things about trade, you know, you need a trade partner, you need a contract partner. If we started hearing that, it's like, oh man, like something fell through, or they're not at the right number. Baseline, the tag is 19, just over 19 million, right? For cornerbacks. Yeah. That's where the number has to start for Jaylon Johnson in order to do any sort of negotiating for the Bears. I mean, that's just common sense. But depending upon how far off they are, like if the tag for him's 19-ish and over 21 is what he wants, I think that there's some ground that they can make up considering the financial flexibility they have in free agency.
Does the cap increase, like the massive jump we saw this year going up 30 million basically, does that change how maybe the future of this contract ends up working out, where Jaylon can go, well, listen, yeah, we could make a deal here this year for this, but like, you see the cap how it jumped this year, what's it going to do next year? What's it going to do the year after that?
That's a great question, because that could also be part of the holdup. That news came out on Friday, and teams like were, you know, expecting, it was like $20 million more than what they had expected. And so to watch that jump, the single greatest jump from one year to the next since the salary cap was introduced, that's going to affect those future years on the contracts. And we have such limited knowledge effectively of this on these extensions, because we've seen two of them done. We saw Montez Sweat done. We saw Cole Kmet last year, how the voids, if there are any void years, if they're not a team that typically uses that to where you can like load things up front and like, you know, but I thought it was just really interesting the way that he talked about the cash flow and the structure and the guarantees. Like if Jaylon Johnson is, you know, looking for a Denzel Ward type deal in terms of guarantees, that's 45 million guaranteed. So he'd want more than that. And I think this is Ryan Poles, like him kind of doubling down too, that I do not want to use the franchise tag. Like that's the last resort. They want to get something done, but that will ultimately be up to Jaylon Johnson to participate in those two. And the window closes by March 5th, goes February 20th to March 5th. Like if they don't have a deal done, they're going to tag him. There's no way that he's getting out of here. You know, he's not getting out of Chicago like this time around. Like they want him here long-term. A 4 or 5 year deal should be very not hard to get to at this point.
I would think if you're going to talk about a deal for him, right? Four is probably, and maybe the Bears are pushing for more, but 4 is probably where he would love to get in on that, right? 28 years old, going on 29.
And then you hit free agency more or less like one time for your next big deal. And that's a really good way to do it.
Yeah, I think that this is to me, this is a no-brainer on both sides. Got to get this deal done. Need Jaylon Johnson in this defense. Flus even talked about, right, the impact that Jaylon Johnson makes and talked about, right, replacing some of these players and how you have to go through, right, with Eddie Jackson not being here, what he's looking for there. So, like, the defensive side of the ball, especially with Flus's mindset, like, Jaylon Johnson has to be quarterback's probably priority number one for everybody, but Jaylon Johnson's got to be number 2 at this point, right?
Before you like even start talking about free agency in the draft, like, you know, and obviously you're right, quarterback is number 1. Figuring out what you're doing there is the first domino of many to fall, like for the Chicago Bears this offseason. But Jaylon Johnson is priority 1B. I like not even gonna say number 2, like, or 3. Like he is. There's 1A and then there's 1B, because he's so important in this defense, and they will have their opportunity to stack their. I know Flus didn't say like what he needs as far as like, you know, most biggest priority in free agency. I can tell you it's defensive line, like, so it's 3 technique. It's it's another edge rusher. It's wide receiver, certainly. It's a safety. Like there's a lot of holes that they still have to fill, but I will say that they're in a good spot right now because The quarterback thing is going to get solved sooner rather than later. The Jaylon Johnson thing is going to get solved sooner rather than later. They could go ways that we don't expect, but ultimately what you'd expect is that they're going to trade Justin Fields. They'll get a pick back. They'll get something else back. They're going to give Jaylon Johnson the big extension that he wants. And then they can start focusing on those next big priorities towards free agency.
And you never want to put yourself in a position where other guys are getting paid before the guy who's given to your team, who's played your team.
They already did that with Montez.
Yeah, I mean,
right?
let's not keep going too far down the road there. Was there anything from Flus? Flus gave us a bunch of coach talk. For the most part, was there anything that really stood out to you from Flus's press conference that I thought the quarterback conversation was a little bit interesting, but nothing crazy.
No, I think that from Eberflus today, in talking about what he's looking for from a young, quarterback, obviously he's, it's the 2-minute situation, it's third downs, it's end of half, all of those things are stuff that he needs in a quarterback. So you didn't really get to find anything out too concretely about what Flus is looking for from this quarterback class. He was speaking, more in generalities, and I think that that's fine. But then, a lot of that, the way he was describing it, describes Justin Fields, talking about the toughness, talking about all the things that, he needs to see. He's already got that in Fields, but can you actually see it in your next quarterback? That's what they're going to try to find out. So that, and Shane Waldron's going to be part of the process. Obviously he's an offensive coordinator. He's good. How much he relies on him though. And I think the structure of this coaching staff, the Bears do think, and they're right, they do have a better infrastructure to bring in a rookie if they're going to go that route than, let's say, the team that they were a year ago. If they were to have drafted Bryce Young would have been probably in a very similar situation to what he was in Carolina. If we're being honest.
Easily, especially, I guess the difference would have been, he would have been Getsy's guy. Yeah. Right. If you're committing to him, that's your quarterback, you're going to maybe put a little bit more into him. But I don't know. When I heard Flus describe, he talked about the needs, and he said, I really want somebody who can operate well in the fourth quarter and end of games, and talked about composure, things like that. I was like, well, if we're going in the draft, that guy's really like JJ McCarthy. We're not the fourth quarter.
When you hear those things,
Drake May a little bit, but Caleb struggled just as much in the fourth quarters this year as I guess you could say Justin Fields did this year. And with both guys, I look at it and I go, well, yeah, the team wasn't good enough.
Yeah, and that's why I think Flus feels so good about where this group is at. And you could just tell, the confidence that he exudes right now. Because if you're going to get a quarterback, you're not bringing them into a team that just went 3-13. You're not. You're bringing them into a far better, a group that has a foundation. It took 2 years to establish this thing. They feel pretty good about it. And he couched a lot of things with if it's Justin, if it's a new quarterback, but that's the first time we've heard that door being left open to, well, maybe Justin's not here next year, and hearing them publicly acknowledge that.
All right. The road to the draft is here, Courtney, and the road to the draft this year is brought to you by Toyota. Toyota, let's go places. You're on the clock, Courtney. I need you to give me 2 time frames here. When is the best time to move the pick, and when is the best time to move Justin Fields? One of each if you're going to do either one.
The best time to move Justin Fields is ASAP, before free agency. Knowing what this team, I just feel my gut's telling me Thursday or Friday next week. That's what it's the timeline from last year. And because then you get to avoid the legal tampering period. Some team will figure it out before, let's say it's New England, just throwing that out there. New England's at 3. They could go draft Marvin Harrison Jr. They could go trade for Justin Fields and send whatever pick they need to, and still have their first round pick to then use on a top receiver. They could do that. And then that then would give them opportunity to see how they want to spend in free agency. Teams want to do this. And I just feel Justin's trade value is not going to be nearly as high as maybe it is right now if they wait longer than necessary for the number 1 pick. I mean, they got a nice haul last year, but they really did. 4 picks and DJ Moore. It's ridiculous. And I asked Ryan Poles about that because we keep hearing, it's nice to hear it from the horse's mouth. We always hear, inside Hal Saul. Someone said they need crazy compensation or they need historic compensation. Ryan Poles' direct, like verbatim answer, like when I asked him about that towards the very end, like, where is it? Like how much, like, what does he actually need? He said, it's hard to say right now, but it's got to help our organization significantly to move around because we saw what it did last year. I'm looking for that type of return to continue to build the football team. So, God, like, which team's going to mortgage their future? Like, and that might not be an answer that teams are willing to come up with right now. They're going to want to see, you know, they're going to want to get through combine week. They're going to probably want to see some pro days. They're going to probably make sure the medical, all those things. I don't think it would be like too far off the timeline of where it was last year, but if it's going to take more, usually trades that like require more assets being thrown into the mix take more time to, you know, to come to fruition. So that's kind of what I think on that.
It's going to be interesting to see. I do think, I don't know, man. Like everybody hears their own thing when you listen to these, because I see just as many people on the timeline that feel like Ryan Poles' comments today led to
like
us trading the first overall pick. That's the same amount. Feel like it led to us trading.
I did not come away with that. Like,
I didn't leave with any information on like when they're going to do anything, what they're going to do, if anything.
They have goals. Like, I think that's the biggest thing. That the goal is before free agency, like to know what Justin Fields, like, is he staying? Is he going? Because, like, you know, that's the whole doing right by him. That's the idea that like you've got to capitalize on this market. But I think he straddled the line pretty well today when we're talking about this in totality.
Yeah, he did a great job today. It was good to hear from the GM today and hear that, you know, he's, I guess, right. He talked about wanting to do right by Justin. That means Atlanta, right? Like, did he show his hand a little bit there, I guess?
Not necessarily. I think that would mean just like not having the guy wait in limbo till like the draft and trading him on draft night. Okay. That's how I read that.
Okay, because when I heard that, I was like, all right, well, I guess he's a Falcon, so I guess Falcon fans may feel that way about it if they're watching this, but it's going to be interesting to see what the Bears are going to do with all of this stuff. Courtney's got to run because she's at the combine. There's stuff to be done. There's reporting that we need, especially getting ready for tomorrow. The Bears talking to Caleb Williams. So appreciate you taking some time out today, Courtney, to break this all down with us. And we'll be tuned in with you, reading articles and listening to you over on the radio throughout the day.
Sounds great. Thanks for having me.
See you guys later. Hit that like button, subscribe to the page. Leave that 5-star review. Y'all know what to do. For Courtney Cronin, I'm Pat the Designer. Y'all stay safe with the Chicago Bear down. Peace.